First, I want to thank Chairman Carter for holding today's hearing and Administrator Regan for coming to testify. I've become very concerned about the punitive regulations and mandates that the Biden administration, especially the EPA, have come out with recently. I represent one of the poorest congressional districts in the country. Over 100,000 families in my district live on less than $50,000 a year. And that's the average cost of an EV. Administrator Regan, I think that we share concern of the high energy costs impacting people who can least afford it. Are you not worried that your latest onslaught of regulatory actions will only serve to increase the heating and the transportation costs for those who are most economically vulnerable?
We've taken a look at all of that.
And do you share that concern with me, that the vulnerable will be most impacted?
Well,
say yes or no.
We've shared the concern throughout the process.
I think we all have to share that concern
which is why
for
we
the most
designed
vulnerable.
the
I think that's
regulation.
part of our mission statement. Moving on, I would like to ask a few questions related to one of the mandates, the California's request for Clean Air Act waiver to implement the ACC2 program, which would ban the sale of internal combustion engines by 2035. Administrator Regan, states that align their vehicle emissions and standards with California standards, such as New York and Washington, represent approximately 40% of the auto market. Based on that fact, would you agree that the regulatory impacts of this rule go beyond California, impacting other states as well?
Well, California legally has the ability to petition us or submit a waiver. We legally have the obligation to review that, and so we're reviewing all of the waivers.
And do you agree that these regulatory impacts go beyond California?
Well, we'd have to take a closer look at these waivers. Each waiver is being looked at individually and are under consideration right now.
So putting aside whether these impacts are good or bad for Americans, would you agree that granting a Clean Air Act waiver to California will generally have significant impact on the U.S. economy?
Well, again, it would depend on the waiver that has been submitted, but I've pledged to follow the law, and the law gives California the right to submit waivers, and EPA legally has to review those waivers.
EPA's national tailpipe emissions mandate mentions ACC2 13 times. 13 times it's mentioned. Do you agree it appears to be significant enough for EPA to use it as justification for a national emission standard?
We did a separate focus on our national standard that was supported by the big autos, the Auto Alliance, the UAW. So EPA's efforts were independent. We take into consideration all states, whether they be—
And yet you took time to mention 13 times the ACC2 mandate. That's mentioned 13 times in the national tailpipe emissions mandate. That has to have impact of your decision-making process.
Whether you're in North Carolina or California, we've taken every state into consideration. It's a national law, and we focused on it being nationally appropriate.
When Assistant Administrator Goffman testified before this committee just 9 months ago in June of last year, he stated that EPA's understanding is that, quote, auto manufacturers have striven to avoid more than just one national fleet. Do you agree that auto dealers will have to alter their national fleet to make the emission standards set by California and others in Section 177?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that question, so we'd have to get you more details on it.
I look forward to the follow-up there. If this rule has significant economic impact, and I think we agree it does, and affecting consumers and markets in multiple states, will that impact competition and innovation in domestic markets? And would you agree that this qualifies as a major role?
What I would say is California has submitted a waiver that we're evaluating. I can't give you an answer on the finality of the waivers because we haven't approved or disapproved those waivers.
Administrator Regan, during a hearing in front of this committee last year, you told me personally, unequivocally, that you do not support a ban on new internal combustion engine vehicles starting in 2035. That was your answer to me. Do you still oppose a ban on new gas-powered cars?
Absolutely, and we have not proposed a rule or finalized a rule that bans internal combustion engines.
When your agency considered California's ACC2 waiver, did you find that the regulatory impacts of the ACC2 waiver were significantly greater than the impacts that EPA analyzed during their reconsideration of the waiver withdrawal for ACC1 in 2022?
I'll have to get back to you on the specifics
These
of
are
these
two
waivers.
areas that I would really appreciate that you do get back to us. My constituents are affected by this. America is affected by this, and your follow-up is welcomed and expected. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.